The executive suite on the 50th floor of Goldman Tower was silent, save for the rhythmic swish-swish of Julia Smith's mop against the imported Italian marble floors. It was 10:45 p.m. on a rainy Tuesday. The city of New York sprawled out beneath the floor-to-ceiling windows, a grid of glittering lights that seemed a million miles away from Julia's reality. Julia paused for a moment, pressing her forearm against her forehead to wipe away a bead of sweat. She was 24 years old, but tonight, she felt 80. Her back ached with a dull, throbbing persistence, and her hands, encased in yellow rubber gloves, were raw from the harsh industrial cleaners she used to scrub away the sins of the corporate elite. She looked around the office. It was less of a workspace and more of a throne room. The desk was a massive slab of obsidian. The leather chairs cost more than her father's car had. The air smelled of sandalwood and money, a scent that was crisp, cool, and utterly indifferent to the smell of ammonia coming from her bucket. Just the bathroom left, Julia whispered to herself, her voice raspy. Just the bathroom, then the trash, then the subway, then home. She forced herself to move. She couldn't afford to be slow. She couldn't afford to be tired. She was a ghost in this building. The cleaning staff was instructed to be invisible, silent, and thorough. Do not disturb the executives. Do not touch the papers. Do not exist. She pushed her cart toward the private bathroom, attached to the CEO's office. She had never met Brian Goldman, the man who owned this tower, this desk, and technically her time. She had seen him on magazine covers in the lobby newsstand, a man with sharp features, cold gray eyes, and a reputation for being as ruthless as he was brilliant. They called him the Iceman of Wall Street. To Julia, he was just the signature on her paycheck, the entity that allowed her to buy groceries and pay the rent for the tiny, crumbling apartment in Queens. As she wrung out the mop, her phone buzzed in the pocket of her uniform. Julia froze. Personal calls were strictly forbidden during shift hours. If the supervisor, Mrs. Gable, caught her, she would be written up, or worse, fired, and losing this job was not an option. Not now. Not ever. She checked the screen. Aunt Martha. Julia's heart hammered against her ribs. Martha never called this late. Martha only called when something was wrong, or when she wanted something. Julia looked around the empty office. The lights were dimmed. The corridors were empty. She peeled off one glove and answered, shielding her mouth with her hand to whisper, "Martha, is everything okay? Is it Lily?" Lily was her 6-year-old sister, the only family she had left since their parents died in the car crash 2 years ago. Lily was the reason Julia scrubbed floors. Lily was the reason Julia breathed. "She's fine for now." Martha's voice crackled over the line, shrill and unsympathetic. "But she won't be for long. The social worker came by today. Unexpected visit." Julia felt the blood drain from her face. "Mr. Henderson? What did he say? The apartment was clean, right? I left dinner in the fridge." "The apartment is a shoebox, Julia," Martha snapped. "And you're never there. You're always working." He noted absentee guardian on his clipboard. "But that's not the worst part." "What?" Julia gripped the marble counter of the CEO's bathroom, her knuckles white. "What is the worst part?" "The court hearing. For permanent custody has been moved up." Martha dropped the bomb casually as if she were discussing the weather. "To tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Tomorrow?" Julia's whisper turned into a strangled cry. "No, it was supposed to be next month. I needed time to save for a lawyer. I needed time to—" "It's tomorrow," Martha cut her off. And Mr. Henderson was very clear. He thinks a single 24-year-old woman working minimum wage cleaning jobs is not a stable environment for a grieving child. He's recommending the state take her. "No," Julia sobbed, tears instantly blurring her vision. "They can't take her. She's my sister. I'm all she has. He says she needs a 2-parent household," Martha continued, her voice dripping with false pity. "He says unless you can prove you have a stable partner, a husband who can provide financial security and presence, they're going to place her in foster care. Or," Martha paused, and Julia could hear the greed in her silence, "or you can sign custody over to me. I'm married. I have a house. The state would pay me the stipend, of course." Julia felt sick. Martha didn't care about Lily. Martha wanted the state check. She had made that clear at the funeral. She had called Lily a burden until she found out about the survivor benefits. "I will never give her to you," Julia hissed, a sudden flash of fury cutting through her fear. "You locked her in a closet when she was 4 because she spilled juice. I will die before I let you. Take her, then say goodbye to her." Martha said coldly. Because unless you walk into that courtroom tomorrow with a ring on your finger and a husband with a six-figure salary, the judge is going to give her to the state. You have until 9 a.m., Julia. Good luck. Click. The silence that followed was heavier than the marble floors. It was crushing. Julia dropped the phone into her apron pocket. Her legs gave way, and she slid down the wall of the CEO's bathroom until she hit the cold tile floor. Lily, her sweet, quiet Lily, who still slept with a nightlight and needed Julia to cut the crusts off her toast. Lily, who waited by the window every night for Julia to come home. Foster care, strangers, or Martha. No, Julia wept, pulling her knees to her chest. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with violent, silent sobs. She was exhausted. She had done everything right. She worked 3 jobs. She saved every penny. She didn't date. She didn't party. She didn't sleep. She gave everything to be a mother to her sister. And it wasn't enough. It was never enough. The injustice of it ripped a scream from her throat, muffled by her hands. I can't do this, she whispered to the empty, luxurious room. I can't fight them alone. She looked up at the ceiling, her eyes red and swollen. I need a miracle, she choked out. I need a husband by tomorrow. She said it louder this time, the desperation spilling out of her. I need a husband by tomorrow, she cried, out, her voice echoing off the tile walls. I need someone to help me, just for one day, please. She stayed there on the floor, weeping, feeling the seconds tick away. Every second brought 9 a.m. closer. Every second brought the loss of her sister closer. She didn't hear the sound of the leather chair moving in the other room. She didn't hear the heavy footsteps on the plush carpet. She was so consumed by her grief that she didn't realize she wasn't alone until a shadow fell over her, blocking the light from the bathroom doorway. Julia gasped, scrambling to her feet, wiping her face frantically with her rubber-gloved hands, smearing tears and snot. She was fired. She was definitely fired. She had been screaming in the CEO's private bathroom. I'm sorry, she blurted out, keeping her head down, afraid to look up. I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't know anyone was here. I'll leave. Please don't report me. I need this job. You need a husband. The voice was deep, baritone, smooth like velvet but hard like granite. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Julia froze. The voice didn't sound angry. It sounded curious and incredibly tired. Slowly, terrifyingly, she lifted her head. Standing in the doorway of the bathroom was a man. He was tall, well over 6 feet, filling the frame. He had taken off his suit jacket and tie. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that were surprisingly muscular for a corporate executive. He held a tumbler of amber liquid in one hand. It was him, the magazine cover, the Iceman, Brian Goldman. He wasn't looking at her with disgust. He wasn't looking at her with pity. His gray eyes were locked onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. He looked at her tear-stained face, her messy uniform, her trembling hands. Mr. Goldman, Julia whispered, terror gripping her. Sir, I was just... You were crying, Brian said calmly. He took a sip of his drink. Never, breaking eye contact. And you were shouting that you need a husband by tomorrow. He stepped into the bathroom. Julia backed up until she hit the sink. The space suddenly felt very small. Is it true? He asked. Sir, please, Julia stammered. It's a personal matter. I shouldn't have brought it to work. I'll finish cleaning and go. I asked you a question, Brian said, his voice lowering. It commanded obedience. Do you need a husband by tomorrow? Julia looked at him. She saw the power in his stance. This man could snap his fingers and buy her entire neighborhood. He could fire her with a word, but he was asking. And in his eyes, she saw something she didn't expect. He wasn't mocking her. He was waiting for an answer. The image of Lily flashed in her mind. Lily in a foster home. Lily crying for her. Julia straightened her spine. She had nothing left to lose. Yes, she said, her voice shaking but clear. I do. If I don't have a husband by 9 a.m. tomorrow, the state is going to take my little sister away from me. Brian stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unsaid words. He swirled the ice in his glass. Custody battle? He guessed. Yes. And the system is biased against single, low-income guardians. Yes. Brian nodded slowly. He took another sip of his drink. He looked exhausted, the lines around his eyes speaking of a different kind of desperation. The desperation of a man who had everything and nothing. He looked at Julia, really looked at her. He saw the beauty beneath the fatigue. He saw the fierce loyalty in her eyes. He saw a woman who was willing to scrub floors at midnight to save someone she loved. He placed his glass on the marble counter next to her bucket of soapy water. "I have a problem too, miss." He paused. "I don't know your name." "Julia," she whispered. "Julia Smith." "I have a problem too, Julia," Brian said. "My board of directors is threatening to remove me as CEO. They say my bachelor lifestyle is unstable for the company's image. They want me to settle down. They want a family man." Julia stared at him, confused. I don't understand, sir." Brian took a step closer. He was so close she could smell the expensive scotch and the weariness on him. "You need a husband to save your sister," he said. "I need a wife to save my company." He extended his hand. It was large, manicured, and steady. "My name is Brian," he said, "and I am not doing anything tomorrow. Morning at 9 a.m. "You're joking," Julia whispered, pressing her back against the cold tile wall. Her heart was beating so fast she felt dizzy. "You're making fun of me. Please, sir, this isn't funny. My sister's life is at stake." Brian didn't blink. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black smartphone. He tapped the screen a few times, then turned it around to face her. It was a bank transfer screen. Payee, Julia Smith. Payroll ID, 8904. Amount, $50,000. He pressed send. A second later, Julia's phone buzzed in her apron pocket. "Check it," Brian commanded softly. Julia pulled out her cracked Android phone. The notification was there. A direct deposit. $50,000. More money than she had made in 3 years. "Why?" she gasped, looking up at him with wide, terrified eyes. I can't accept this." "That is a retainer," Brian said, sliding his phone back into his pocket. "Consider it a signing bonus. I am not joking, Julia. I need a wife to secure my position as CEO. You need a husband to secure custody of your sister. It is a mutually beneficial arrangement. A merger." He looked at his watch. 11:15 p.m. "We have less than 10 hours before court," he said, his voice shifting into the crisp, efficient tone he used in boardrooms. "Do you have a birth certificate? Identification?" Yes. In my locker downstairs," Julia stammered, her brain struggling to catch up with reality. "But, Mr. Goldman, we can't just get married. It takes time. The license, the waiting period." "I am Brian Goldman," he said simply. "I know a judge who owes me a favor. He can waive the waiting period and officiate a private ceremony tonight. But we need to move. Now." He held out his hand again, not to shake but to lead. "Are you in, Julia? Or do we let the state take your sister?" The mention of Lily snapped Julia out of her shock. She looked at the man in front of her. He was a stranger. He was intimidating. He was everything she wasn't. But he was. Offering her a lifeline when she was drowning. She peeled off her yellow rubber glove. Her hand was red, rough, and smelled of bleach. She hesitated, looking at his manicured hand. "My hand is dirty," she whispered shamefully. Brian didn't wait. He reached out and took her hand firmly. His grip was warm, dry, and strong. He didn't flinch at the smell of cleaning chemicals. "It's an honest hand," he said. "Come on, we have work to do." The ride in the elevator was silent. Julia stared at her. Reflection in the polished brass doors. A tired girl in a stained blue uniform standing next to a titan of industry. When the doors opened to the lobby, the night security guard, old Mr. Henderson, no relation to the social worker, nearly dropped his coffee. "Good evening, Mr. Goldman," the guard stammered, staring at Julia. Julia?" "Good evening, Frank," Brian said, guiding Julia toward the revolving doors with a hand on the small of her back. "Mrs. Goldman and I are leaving for the night." "Mrs. Goldman." Julia tripped over her own feet. Brian caught her elbow, steadying her. He didn't correct himself. He walked her straight to the curb where his black Maybach was waiting. The driver, a stoic man named Thomas, opened the door. If he was surprised to see the cleaning lady getting into the back seat, he didn't show it. "Where to, sir?" "The penthouse first," Brian said, settling into the leather seat. "Then Judge Pendergast's residence." As the car glided into the rainy New York streets, isolating them from the noise and the cold, Julia sat on the edge of the seat, clutching her bucket bag. She felt like she was going to wake up any second. "I can't wear this to court," she whispered, looking down at her uniform. "I know," Brian said. He was typing on his phone. I texted my personal shopper. She's meeting us at my apartment with options. What size are you? Size 4, or maybe a 2 now. I haven't been eating much. Brian stopped typing. He looked at her, sideways. The streetlights flickered over his face, illuminating the sharp angle of his jaw. We'll fix that too, he murmured. From now on you eat. That's in the contract. Julia looked at him. Why are you doing this? I mean, really? You could hire a model. An actress, why the maid? Brian looked out the window. Because models and actresses want the spotlight, Julia. They want the fame. You just want your sister. That makes you loyal. And right now, loyalty is the only currency I don't have. He turned back to her. And because you were the only one crying in my bathroom, fate has a sense of humor. The penthouse was a palace in the sky. It was modern, sleek, and terrifyingly expensive. When they arrived, a rack of clothes was already waiting in the living room. A frantic-looking stylist was steaming a cream-colored dress. Brian, darling, the stylist rushed over. You gave me 20 minutes. This is madness. It's necessary, Coco, Brian said. He gestured to Julia. Make her look like a CEO's wife. Modest but expensive, strong but maternal. It's for a custody hearing. Coco turned to Julia. She looked her up and down, pursing her lips. Good bone structure, Coco muttered, grabbing Julia's chin. Terrible bags under the eyes. Come on, honey. We have to scrub the bleach smell off you and put you in cashmere. For the next hour, Julia was washed, blow-dried, and dressed. She stood in front of the full-length mirror and gasped. The woman staring back wasn't the maid. She wore a tailored cream sheath dress that hit just below the knee, a camel-colored trench coat, and nude heels. Her hair was blown out in soft waves. The makeup was subtle, hiding the exhaustion and highlighting her large, expressive brown eyes. She looked powerful. Brian walked into the room. He had changed too, into a fresh navy suit and a crisp white shirt. He stopped when he saw her. He didn't say anything for a long moment. His gray eyes traveled from her heels to her hair. Well, Julia asked nervously, fidgeting with the hem of her coat. Do I look like Mrs. Goldman? Brian cleared his throat. He walked over and stood behind her, looking at their reflection in the mirror. He looked like the king of the world, and she looked like she belonged right next to him. You look, Brian said, his voice slightly rougher than before. Convincing. Let's go get married. The wedding was in the judge's study at 2 a.m. It wasn't romantic. It was legal. Judge Pendergast, wearing a bathrobe over his pajamas, signed the license with a sleepy grunt. Do you take this man? Do you take this woman? I do, Brian said, looking at her. I do, Julia whispered, looking at the floor. By the power vested in me. You're hitched. Now get out of my house so I can sleep. They walked back to the car. Brian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. I almost forgot, he said. He opened it. Inside sat a diamond ring. Not a massive, gaudy rock, but a vintage emerald-cut diamond that caught the streetlight with a cold fire. It was my grandmother's, Brian said, sliding it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. It carries weight in this city. People recognize it. Wear it. Julia stared at the ring. It was heavier than her mop bucket. Thank you, she whispered. Brian. It was the first time she had used his first name. It sounded strange on her tongue. Intimate. You're welcome, Julia, he replied. Now, try to sleep in the car. We have a war. To fight at 9 a.m. 9 a.m. Queen's Family Court. The courtroom smelled of stale coffee and despair. It was a place where families were broken apart by paperwork. Aunt Martha sat on the front bench looking smug. She wore her church clothes, a floral dress that clashed with her sour expression. Next to her sat Mr. Henderson, the social worker, looking bored and checking his watch. She's late, Martha hissed loudly. Typical. She probably overslept from one of her 3 jobs. This is exactly why she's unfit, Your Honor. Judge Miller, a stern woman with glasses on a chain, looked at the clock. It is 9:01. Is Miss Smith present? The doors remained closed. Your Honor. Martha stood up, feigning tears. My niece is irresponsible. She loves the child, I'm sure, but she can't provide. I am ready to take custody immediately. I have the papers right here. Mr. Henderson nodded. I concur, Your Honor. Miss Smith's financial situation is precarious at best. The child needs stability. We recommend immediate transfer of guardianship to Mrs. Martha Higgins. Julia wasn't there. Lily, who was sitting in the corner with a court-appointed guardian, looked at the door with big, tear-filled eyes. She hugged her ragged teddy bear. Very well, Judge Miller sighed, picking up her gavel. Since the respondent is absent and considering the recommendation of the state, bang. The courtroom doors didn't open. They swung wide with force. Every head turned. Walking down the center aisle was not the frantic, disheveled cleaning lady they expected. It was Julia. But it was a Julia they had never seen. She walked with her head high, the cream coat flowing behind her like a cape. Her heels clicked rhythmically on the linoleum. She looked radiant, composed, and undeniably expensive. And she wasn't alone. Walking beside her, with a hand protectively on the small of her back, was a man whose face was on the front page of the Financial Times, at least once a month. Brian Goldman. A hush fell over the room. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. Aunt Martha's jaw dropped so low it nearly hit the bench. Mr. Henderson sat up straight, his boredom evaporating instantly. "I apologize for the delay, Your Honor," Brian spoke. His voice filled the room, authoritative and calm, the voice of a man who owned the building he was standing in. "My wife and I had some trouble with the paparazzi outside." "Your wife?" Judge Miller blinked, looking over her glasses. Julia stopped at the defendant's table. She looked at Martha. She saw the shock, the fear, the realization that her plan was crumbling. Julia smiled. It was a small, cold smile. "Good morning, Martha," Julia said smoothly. "Sorry to keep you waiting." She turned to the judge. "Julia Goldman, present, Your Honor," she announced, raising her left hand to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. The light caught the massive emerald-cut diamond on her ring finger. It flashed like a beacon. "And this," Julia gestured to Brian, "is my husband. We are here to bring my sister home." The silence in the courtroom was shattered by Aunt Martha's screeching laugh. It was a desperate, ugly sound. "Husband?" Martha pointed a shaking finger at Brian. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. That man is Brian Goldman. He owns the building Julia cleans. She's his maid. She scrubs his toilets." She turned to the gallery, looking for validation. "He hired her. Or she seduced him. This isn't a marriage. It's a transaction. Look at her. Yesterday she was begging me for $20 and today she's wearing Chanel. It's a fraud." Mr. Henderson, the social worker, looked at Brian with suspicion. "Your Honor, if this marriage is indeed recent, we have concerns about the stability of the home environment." Judge Miller peered over her glasses at Brian. "Mr. Goldman, is it true that Mrs. Goldman was your employee?" Brian didn't flinch. He didn't look at Martha. He stepped forward, placing a hand on the railing. He looked every inch the billionaire titan, but his voice was surprisingly warm. "It is true, Your Honor," Brian said. "Julia worked in my building, and in that time, I saw a woman of extraordinary character, while others, like her aunt," he cast a withering glance at Martha, "abandoned family responsibilities. Julia worked 3 jobs to support her sister. She is hardworking, loyal, and fierce. Qualities I admire, qualities I fell in love with." He turned to look at Julia. He took her hand. His thumb brushed over the diamond ring. "We kept our relationship private because of my position, but when we heard about this custody threat, we decided to make it official immediately. I can provide Lily with the best schools, health care, and a stable, loving home. Can Mrs. Higgins say the same?" The judge looked at Martha. Martha was turning purple. "He's lying," Martha shrieked. "It's a fake marriage. Mrs. Higgins, sit down." Judge Miller banged her gavel. "Mr. Goldman's financial and social standing is a matter of public record. He is more than capable of providing for the child." The judge looked at the file, then at Lily, who was watching Julia with wide, hopeful eyes. "The court finds that the best interests of the child are served by remaining with her sister," Judge Miller ruled. "I am granting emergency temporary custody to Julia and Brian Goldman." "Yes," Julia gasped, tears of relief spilling over. "However," the judge's voice cut through the celebration, "this is a provisional ruling. Given the sudden nature of this union, there will be a 90-day probationary period. Full permanent custody will only be granted after a court-appointed social worker verifies the stability of the home. One misstep and the child goes to the state." Brian nodded stiffly. "We welcome the scrutiny, Your Honor. 30 days. They had to fake it for 30 days. The exit from the courthouse was a war zone. Someone had tipped off the press. Maybe Martha. Maybe a clerk. Mr. Goldman, is it true?" Who is the mystery woman? Is she really the cleaning lady? Cameras flashed like strobe lights. Microphones were shoved in their faces. Lily buried her face in Julia's neck, terrified. Security, Brian barked into his phone. Suddenly, 4 large men in black suits materialized, forming a wall around them. Brian put his arm around Julia's shoulders, shielding her and Lily from the vultures. Don't look at them, Brian murmured in her ear. Just keep walking. Look at me. Julia looked up at him. His face was hard, his jaw set. He looked like a general guiding them through a battlefield. For a second, she forgot it was fake. She just felt safe. They dove into the waiting SUV. The door slammed shut, cutting off the noise. Silence. Lily pulled her head out of Julia's neck. She looked around the luxurious leather interior of the Maybach. Then she looked at the scary man in the suit sitting next to her sister. Jules? Lily whispered, clutching her dirty teddy bear, Mr. Buttons. Who is the giant? Julia froze. She hadn't thought about this part. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that you married a stranger? This is Brian, Julia said carefully. He's my friend, and he's going to help us. I'm your new brother-in-law, Brian corrected, looking at the child. He looked uncomfortable. He clearly had 0 experience with children. He eyed the dirty teddy bear with mild concern for his upholstery. Are you a giant? Lily asked. Seriously. Brian blinked. No, I am a CEO. What's a CEO? It means I tell people what to do, Brian said flatly. Oh, Lily frowned. Like Aunt Martha? Brian bristled. No, not like Aunt Martha. The arrival at the penthouse was the real culture shock. If the car was fancy, the apartment was another planet. Lily walked in, her mouth open. She spun around on the polished floors, her sneakers squeaking. It's so big, Lily whispered. Is this a hotel? It's home, bug, Julia said, though it felt like a lie. Don't touch the sculptures, Brian said immediately as Lily reached for a modern art piece. They are sharp and expensive. Lily pulled her hand back. She looked at Brian with suspicion. Brian, Julia said softly. She's 6. She touches things. Then she can touch things in her room, Brian said. I had the guest suite prepared. He led them down the hall. He opened a door. Julia gasped. The room was filled with toys. Not just any toys. Expensive, educational, wooden toys. A massive dollhouse. A library of books. A bed that looked like a cloud. You did this? Julia asked, stunned. When? While you were getting dressed? Brian shrugged, loosening his tie. I called my assistant. I told her to buy everything a 6-year-old girl likes. I assume she succeeded. Lily screamed with joy and ran into the room, diving onto the bed. Julia looked at Brian. Her heart did a strange flip. He was cold, yes, but he was efficient and generous. Thank you, she said. Really, you saved us today. I secured my asset, Brian said, retreating behind his walls. And now I have to deal with the fallout. The board is calling. The press is calling. My ex-girlfriend is calling. Oh, Julia felt a pang of guilt. I'm sorry. Don't be. This is the deal. Brian checked his watch. I have to go to the office. The staff will make dinner. Please, try to keep the noise down. I need to work when I get back. He turned to leave. Brian? He stopped. The social worker, Julia, said, 30 days, we have to make this look real. That means you have to spend time with us. With her. Brian looked at Lily, who was currently making Mr. Buttons jump on the silk duvet. He looked terrified. I don't do children, Julia, he said stiffly. I pay for them, I don't play with them. You do now, Julia said, finding her courage. Clause 1 of our new arrangement. You have to learn to be a dad, or at least a convincing uncle. Brian stared at her. We'll see. He walked out. First night was a disaster. Lily wouldn't eat the gourmet salmon prepared by the chef. She wanted dinosaur nuggets. Julia didn't know how to turn on the shower in the high-tech bathroom and ended up soaking the floor. And Brian didn't come home until midnight. Julia was sitting in the kitchen eating a cold piece of toast when he walked in. He looked exhausted. He smelled of scotch again. Rough day at the office, husband? She asked, trying to lighten the mood. Brian didn't smile. He tossed a newspaper onto the island counter. Headline, The Maid of Manhattan, CEO weds cleaning lady in shotgun wedding. The photo was awful. It was Julia looking terrified outside the court, and Brian looking angry. The board is furious, Brian said, pouring himself a water. They think I'm having a mental breakdown. They think you're a gold digger who trapped me. I can sign a prenup, Julia offered quickly. I don't want your money. It's too late for that. The optics are set. Brian leaned against the counter, rubbing his temples. There is a gala on Friday, the foundation ball. It's the biggest event of the year. Okay? You have to go. Brian looked at her. And you can't just look like a wife. You have to look like my wife. You have to charm the vipers. You have to convince the investors that this is the love story of the century, not a midlife crisis. Julia looked down at her hands. Yesterday she was scrubbing toilets. Friday she had to charm billionaires. I don't know how to be a socialite, Brian. I don't know which fork to use. I don't know how to talk about whatever rich people talk about. Yachts? Brian sighed. He walked over to her. He reached out and tilted her chin up. You stood up to Aunt Martha, he said. You stood up to me in the bathroom. You have a spine, Julia. That's more than most of the people in that ballroom have. He dropped his hand. Tomorrow, lessons start. Etiquette, dancing, talking. You have 3 days to become the Queen of New York. And, if I fail, then I lose the company, Brian said simply. And the judge sees through our charade. And you lose Lily. The stakes were set. Teach me, Julia said. Day 1, etiquette. Coco, the stylist, was back, but this time with an elderly woman named Mrs. Higgins, no relation to Martha, who wielded a ruler like a weapon. Back straight. Chin up. No, you don't slurp the soup, you tilt the spoon away. Julia walked with a book on her head, while Brian sat in the corner, working on his laptop, occasionally glancing up to correct her posture. You walk like you're rushing to clean a spill, Brian critiqued without looking up. Walk like you own the floor, not like you're about to scrub it. Day 2, the interview. Brian sat across from her at the dining table, role-playing as an investor. So, Mrs. Goldman, how did you meet? We met at work, Julia stammered. Boring, Brian snapped. Lie better. We met at a charity auction. You outbid me for a painting. I was intrigued by your fire. I can't lie like that. You have to. It's a story. Sell it. Day 3, the dance. This was the hardest part. Late at night in the living room, soft jazz playing. Brian took her hand. Left hand here, right hand here. Follow my lead. They moved awkwardly at first. Julia stepped on his expensive Italian leather shoes. Sorry. Stop apologizing, Brian murmured, pulling her closer. Just feel the rhythm. They spun. Closer. For a moment the music swelled. Julia looked up at him. He looked down. The distance between them vanished. She smelled his sandalwood scent. He felt the warmth of her waist. It wasn't a lesson anymore. It was a moment. Brian stopped spinning. He stared at her lips. You're learning, he whispered, his voice rough. I have a good teacher, she breathed back. He almost kissed her. She could feel the intent radiating off him. Then a door slammed. Jules, Mr. Buttons is hungry, Lily yelled from the hallway. They sprang apart like guilty teenagers. Friday night, the gala. The Plaza Hotel ballroom was a sea of diamonds and judgment. Julia stood at the top of the stairs, her hand on Brian's arm. She wore a midnight blue velvet gown that exposed her shoulders. She wore the emerald diamond ring. She looked breathtaking. Ready? Brian asked. He looked nervous. No, Julia admitted. Just remember. Brian leaned in, whispering in her ear. You are the only person in this room who knows what it's like to survive on nothing. These people are terrified of losing their status. You are already stronger than them. He squeezed her arm. Now, let's go make them jealous. They descended the stairs. All eyes turned. The whispers started. But before they could reach the floor, a woman stepped out of the crowd to block their path. She was tall, blonde, and wore a dress that looked like it cost more than Julia's life. It was Vanessa, the ex, the socialite. Brian, Vanessa purred, looking at Julia like she was a stain on the carpet. Is this the little maid I've been reading about? Did you bring your mop, darling? Someone spilled a drink over there. The people nearby snickered. Julia froze. The etiquette lessons hadn't covered this. Brian stepped forward, his eyes flashing with anger, ready to defend her. But Julia put a hand on his chest to stop him. She remembered what Brian said. You have a spine. She stepped forward, smiling sweetly at Vanessa. Actually, Julia said, her voice clear and loud enough for the circle to hear. I left the mop at home. But it's funny you mentioned cleaning, Vanessa, because looking at your reputation in this town, I'd need a lot more than a bucket to clean up your mess. The circle gasped. Brian's eyebrows shot up. Vanessa turned red. Excuse me? Shall we dance, husband? Julia turned to Brian, ignoring the woman completely. Brian stared at her. Then, a slow, genuine smirk spread across his face. "We shall, wife." He led her to the dance floor. "You just insulted the daughter of the bank chairman." Brian chuckled as he spun her. "Was I too harsh?" "No." Brian pulled her close, his eyes shining with something that looked suspiciously like pride. "You were perfect." They danced, and for the first time in front of the world, they looked like a power couple. But watching from the shadows of the balcony, a man with a camera and a long lens wasn't looking at their dance. He was looking at his phone. He dialed a number. "Yeah, I'm at the gala," the man whispered. "The new wife? It's all a show. I did some digging. The little sister. There's no adoption paper filed yet. And I found the aunt. She's ready to talk. We can blow this whole fake marriage wide open by morning." Saturday morning did not bring sunlight. It brought a storm. Julia woke up to the sound of Brian shouting. It wasn't his usual controlled corporate baritone. It was the raw, angry shout of a man who had lost control. She threw on her silk robe and ran down the hallway to the living room. Brian was pacing, his phone pressed to his ear, his other hand gripping a tablet so hard the screen looked like it might crack. The coffee table was covered in newspapers. "I don't care who leaked it," Brian roared into the phone. "Kill the story. Buy the publisher if you have to. Just make it go away." He slammed the phone down on the couch and looked up. He saw Julia. His eyes were wild. "Don't look at the internet," he said harshly. "Why?" Julia walked over to the table. "What happened?" She looked at the New York Post. The headline screamed in bold black letters, "Billionaire's bargain bride. Aunt claims he bought her for $50K. Julia's hands flew to her mouth. There was a photo of the bank transfer, a screenshot. "How?" she whispered. "How did they get this?" "Your phone," Brian said, pacing again. "Did you leave it unattended? Did Martha have access to your passwords?" I don't know. Maybe at the courthouse? She was sitting right behind us. It doesn't matter now." Brian ran a hand through his hair. "The narrative is out. They're saying I bought a desperate woman to save my CEO seat. They're calling you a victim and me a predator. The board is calling for an emergency vote of no confidence on Monday." Julia sank onto the sofa. "And Lily? That's the worst part." Brian's phone rang again. He looked at the caller ID. "Social Services." He answered on speaker. "This is Brian Goldman." "Mr. Goldman?" Mr. Henderson's voice was icy. "I've seen the news. Allegations of financial coercion are extremely serious. If this marriage is a sham designed to defraud the custody court, that is a felony." "It is not a sham," Brian said through gritted teeth. "These are lies from a disgruntled relative." "Then you won't mind if I move up my home visit," Henderson said. "I'm coming today, at 2 p.m., and I'll be bringing a colleague from the fraud department. If I see one sign that this isn't a genuine, stable marriage, I'm taking the child into protective custody immediately." Click. Brian and Julia stared at the phone. It was 9 a.m. They had 5 hours. "We have to fix this," Julia said, standing up. Her panic was gone, replaced by the same steel she used to scrub floors for 12 hours a day. "I need to go to the bank. I need to get printouts proving that money was used for something else, a dowry, a wedding gift, something legal. I have lawyers for that," Brian said. "Lawyers look guilty, Brian. I need to go myself. I need to show my face and look like a happy wife, not a victim." She grabbed her purse. "You stay here. You watch Lily." Brian froze. "Me? No. I have to handle the PR team." "The PR team can wait. Henderson is coming in 5 hours. If the apartment looks like a war zone and Lily doesn't know you, we lose. You have to bond with her, Brian, now." "Julia, I can't." "Clause 1, Julia shouted, heading for the elevator. "Be a dad. I'll be back at 1 key. The elevator doors closed, leaving the titan of Wall Street alone in his penthouse with a 6-year-old girl who thought he was a giant. 10:30 a.m. Brian Goldman stood in the middle of the living room. Lily Smith stood in the doorway of her bedroom, clutching Mr. Buttons. They stared at each other like two different species. "Do you want to check stock futures?" Brian asked awkwardly. Lily blinked. "I want pancakes. The chef is off today, weekend. Jules makes me dinosaur pancakes." Brian sighed. "Fine, pancakes." He walked to the kitchen. He had never cooked a pancake in his life. He pulled out flour, eggs, milk. He Googled how to make pancakes. Lily sat on the counter, watching him with intense scrutiny. "You're making a mess," she observed as Brian spilled flour on his navy trousers. "I am innovating," Brian corrected. He managed to create something that looked like a burnt circle. He put it on a plate. "Eat," he commanded gently. Lily took a bite. She chewed. She spat it out. "It tastes like sadness," she said. Brian looked at the burnt pancake. "Accurate. Can we play hide and seek?" Lily asked. Brian checked his watch. Julia had been gone an hour. "Fine, I count. You hide." He closed his eyes. 1, 2, 3. He counted to 10. He opened his eyes. The penthouse was silent. "Ready or not?" he called out, walking toward the living room. He checked behind the sofa. Nothing. He checked the curtains. Nothing. He checked the guest room. Nothing. "Lily?" Silence. "Lily, game over. Come out." Still silence. Panic, cold and sharp, started to prick at Brian's chest. The apartment was huge. There were balconies, there were sharp sculptures. "Lily!" he shouted, running down the hall. He ran into his office. Empty. He ran into the master bedroom. Empty. Then, he heard a small sound coming from the walk-in closet in the hallway. A whimper. Brian ripped the door open. Lily was sitting on the floor, surrounded by his expensive coats. She was clutching her stomach, her face pale, beads of sweat on her forehead. "Lily," Brian dropped to his knees. "What is it? Are you hiding?" "My tummy hurts," Lily whispered. Her teeth were chattering. "It hurts really bad." Brian touched her forehead. It was burning, like fire. "You're burning up," Brian said, his voice rising in panic. "Did you eat something? Besides the sadness pancake?" "No, just hurts." Lily curled into a ball, letting out a sharp cry of pain. Brian froze. He was 10 years old again, sitting in the wrecked car. His mother was moaning in pain. He couldn't help her. He didn't know what to do. The helplessness washed over him, paralyzing him. "Do something," a voice screamed in his head. "Don't just watch." He grabbed his phone. He dialed Julia. Voicemail. She was in the subway. He dialed 911. "Emergency," the operator said. "My daughter," Brian said without thinking. My wife's sister. She's 6. High fever. Abdominal pain. She's fading. Is she breathing?" "Yes, but it's shallow. We're sending a unit. But sir, with the traffic in Midtown, it might be 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Lily groaned again, her eyes rolling back slightly. "No," Brian snarled. "I'm not waiting." He scooped Lily up in his arms. She felt tiny, fragile, a little bird with a broken wing. He ran to the elevator. He didn't wait for Thomas the driver. He ran out of the building, carrying her into the street. "Taxi!" he roared, stepping into traffic. A yellow cab screeched to a halt. Brian Goldman, a man worth billions, dove into the back seat of a dirty taxi, clutching a sick child to his chest. "Mount Sinai Hospital," Brian ordered. "Drive like you're stealing it. I'll pay you $5,000. The driver hit the gas. 12:30 p.m. Julia ran into the emergency room waiting area. She was breathless, her hair wild, clutching her purse. She saw him. Brian was sitting in a plastic chair in the corner. His white shirt was covered in flour and wrinkled. His face was pale. "Brian!" Julia screamed, running to him. "Where is she? What happened?" Brian stood up. He looked shaken. "Appendicitis," he said, his voice rough. "It ruptured. They took her into surgery immediately." "Oh my God." Julia covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Is she?" "The doctor said she'll be fine," Brian said quickly, grabbing her shoulders to steady her. "We got here in time. Just barely. Another hour and the infection would have spread." Julia collapsed against him, sobbing into his chest. "I shouldn't have left. I'm a terrible sister." "No," Brian said firmly, wrapping his arms around her. He held her tight, his chin resting on her head. "You were fighting for her future, and I just did what had to be done." Julia pulled back. She looked at him. She saw the flour on his pants. She saw the terror in his eyes that hadn't fully faded. "You saved her," she whispered. "She was so small, Julia." Brian's voice cracked. "She was burning up. I was terrified." "You did it." Julia reached up and cupped his face. "You didn't freeze. You saved her." For a moment, in the middle of the chaotic ER, they weren't a fake couple. They were two parents terrified for their child. The connection was electric, undeniable. "Family of Lily Smith?" a doctor called out. "Here," Brian and Julia said in unison. 2:15 p.m. The private hospital room was quiet. Lily was asleep, a small IV in her arm, a stuffed bear, a new clean one from the gift shop, tucked under her chin. Brian sat in the armchair in the corner, watching the heart monitor beep. Julia sat on the edge of the bed, stroking Lily's hair. The door opened. Mr. Henderson walked in. He was followed by a stern-looking woman in a gray suit. They stopped. They expected to find a fake marriage. They expected to find a billionaire checking his stocks while the nanny did the work. Instead, they saw silence. Lily was unconscious, hooked up to monitors. And Brian Goldman, the Billionaire CEO, was slumped in the uncomfortable plastic chair next to the bed, fast asleep. His expensive shirt was ruined with flour and sweat. His head was resting uncomfortably on the mattress, his hand firmly gripping Lily's tiny fingers, as if he were physically anchoring her to the world. Julia stood up to greet them, but Henderson held up a hand. He looked at the sleeping CEO. He saw the sheer exhaustion and the protective grip on the child's hand. You can fake a wedding. You can fake a bank transfer. You cannot fake that kind of devotion. Let him sleep, Henderson whispered to Julia. I don't need to ask any questions. Today, the picture speaks for itself. The home inspection can wait until she's discharged. Focus on her recovery. Thank you, Brian said. The social workers left. Brian let out a long breath and sank back into the chair. We did it, Julia said tiredly. We fooled them again. Brian looked at Lily. Then he looked at Julia. I don't think I was fooling anyone today, Julia, he said quietly. Julia looked at him. What do you mean? I mean, Brian stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot. I mean that when I was in that cab, I wasn't thinking about the contract. I wasn't thinking about the board. I was just thinking that if anything happened to her, I would break. He turned to face her. I promised no emotional attachment. I broke the rule. Julia's heart skipped a beat. With Lily? With both of you. The air in the room shifted. It became heavy, charged. Brian, Julia stepped toward him. No. He put a hand up, stepping back. The walls were coming. Back up. The fear was returning. This is dangerous, Julia. Today proved it. I can't do this. I can't have people I can lose. It hurts too much. That's life, Brian. Not my life, he said harshly. My life is controlled, predictable, safe. Today was chaos. He grabbed his jacket. I'm going to the office. I'll send the car for you when she's discharged. You're leaving? Julia asked, stunned. After everything? I have a company to save, Brian said, his voice turning cold again. The press is still out there. I need to spin this hero story before the market closes. He walked out. He left her alone in the hospital room. Julia looked at the closed door. She realized then that saving Lily was the easy part. Saving Brian from himself was going to be the real war. But as she sat back down, she saw something on the chair Brian had vacated. His phone. He had forgotten it in his haste to escape his feelings. And it was buzzing. A text message on the lock screen. From unknown. Number, good job with the hospital stunt. Very convincing. But I know about the NDA you made the Maid sign. Meet me tonight, or I release the audio recording of your proposal in the bathroom. Julia stared at the screen. Her blood ran cold. Someone had recorded them in the bathroom that first night. Someone knew it was all a deal. And Brian didn't have his phone. Julia stared at the phone in her hand. The screen glowed with the threat. Audio recording. The bathroom. She remembered that night. The echo of the tiles. Her screaming that she needed a husband. Brian offering to buy her. If that audio leaked, Brian wouldn't just lose his company. He would be ruined. He would be painted as a predator who took advantage of a desperate employee. He could go to jail for fraud. She looked at Lily sleeping peacefully in the hospital bed. Brian had saved Lily. He had faced his worst fear, losing control, to save her sister. Now it's my turn, Julia whispered. She didn't call the police. She didn't call Brian's lawyers. She typed a reply to the unknown number. Me. I have the phone. I'm coming. Where? Unknown. The service entrance of Goldman Tower. Midnight. Come alone, or the file goes to TMZ. Julia deleted the text thread. She put the phone in her pocket. She leaned down and kissed Lily's forehead. Be brave, Bug, she whispered. I'll be right back. She walked out of the hospital room, past the nurse's station, and into the cool night air. She didn't have a plan. She just had the fierce, protective rage of a woman who was done being a pawn. Midnight. Goldman Tower service entrance. The service entrance was a dark alley behind the glittering skyscraper. It smelled of wet cardboard and trash, the smell of Julia's old life. It was raining again, a cold drizzle that soaked through her clothes. Julia stood under the flickering yellow security light. She shivered, hugging her arms. "You're punctual. Good help is hard to find." Julia turned. Stepping out of the shadows was not one person but two. Aunt Martha walked out first, clutching a large designer handbag that looked fake. She had a greedy, nervous smile on her face. But she wasn't the mastermind. Behind her, holding a sleek voice recorder, was Vanessa, the ex-girlfriend, the socialite. "Vanessa?" Julia asked, not surprised. "I should have known. Martha isn't smart enough to bug a bathroom." "Watch your mouth, girl," Martha snapped. "I hired a private investigator to sweep the office months ago," Vanessa said, smoothly stepping into the light. Her blonde hair was perfect, her trench coat pristine. "He planted a bug in the private bathroom. I wanted dirt on Brian's business dealings. I didn't expect to catch a Cinderella story." Vanessa tapped the recorder against her palm. "It's all here, darling, you crying. Brian offering $50,000. The transaction. It's brutal. The board will vomit when they hear it." "What do you want?" Julia asked, keeping her voice steady. "I want my niece," Martha interrupted, "and the monthly stipend. And I want the company." Vanessa smiled. "Brian will resign when this leaks. The stock will tank. My father will buy the controlling share for pennies on the dollar, and as a bonus, I get to watch him suffer for humiliating me." "He didn't humiliate you," Julia said, stepping closer. "He just didn't love you, and you can't stand that." "He doesn't love you either," Vanessa laughed sharply. "You're a prop, honey. A paid rental. And now, the rental period is over." Vanessa held out a hand. "Brian's phone, give it to me. I have his passwords, but I need the physical device for the two-factor authentication. Without his Face ID or that token, I can't authorize the stock transfer." Julia reached into her pocket. She pulled out Brian's phone, the key to his empire. Martha licked her lips. "Give it here, Julia. Don't be stupid." Julia looked at the phone. Then she looked at Vanessa. "No. Excuse me? You're going to release the recording?" "Anyway," Julia said, "people like you never stop taking. If I give you this phone, you destroy him. If I don't, you destroy him. So I'm choosing the option where I don't help you." She raised her arm and smashed Brian's phone onto the concrete pavement. It shattered into plastic and glass shards. Vanessa shrieked, "You little gutter rat." "Release the tape," Julia challenged, her eyes blazing. "Go ahead. Let the world hear it. Let them hear a desperate woman begging for help, and a man stepping up to save her. You think it makes him look like a monster? I think it makes him look like a hero. It makes him a fraud," Vanessa yelled, losing her cool. "He bought a wife. He bought a family." The voice came from the shadows of the alley entrance. Deep, thunderous. All three women froze. Brian Goldman walked into the light. He wasn't wearing his jacket. His shirt was soaked with rain. He looked terrifying. "Brian?" Vanessa took a step back, clutching the recorder. I tracked." "The phone," Brian said calmly, walking to stand beside Julia. He didn't look at Vanessa. He looked at Julia. "You smashed my phone. I had photos of Lily on that." "It was clouded," Julia said, her heart hammering. "I backed it up." Brian smirked. "Good girl." He turned to Vanessa and Martha. The smirk vanished. The Iceman returned. "You want to release the recording, Vanessa? Do it." Vanessa blinked. "What? It will ruin you." "I don't care," Brian said. He reached out and took Julia's hand. He interlaced their fingers, showing the ring, showing the connection. "I spent my whole life building a fortress to keep people out. I thought power was the only thing that mattered. But today, I carried a sick child in my arms and realized I would trade every share of Goldman stock just to see her smile." He squeezed Julia's hand. "This marriage started as a contract. Yes, let the world know. But tell them the rest, Vanessa. Tell them that the maid taught the CEO how to be a human being. Tell them that I love her." Julia gasped. She looked up at him. He wasn't looking at the villains, he was looking at her, and his eyes were wide open, vulnerable. "I love you, Julia," Brian said, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't want a fake wife. I want you. Real. Messy. Forever. If that costs me the company, keep the change." Vanessa stared at them. She looked at the recorder in her hand. It suddenly felt very heavy and very useless. "You can't blackmail a man who has nothing to hide." "You're pathetic," Vanessa spat. She threw the recorder into a puddle. Enjoy poverty, Brian. She turned and stormed off, her heels clicking angrily away. Aunt Martha stood there, looking between the smashed phone and the angry billionaire. I still want custody, Martha stammered. Martha, Brian said low and dangerous. If I ever see you near my wife or my daughter again, I will use my remaining fortune to hire lawyers who will find every parking ticket you've ever unpaid. Go. Away. Martha paled. She scrambled backward and ran into the night. Silence returned to the alley. Just the rain and the distant city hum. Julia looked at Brian. She was shaking. Did you mean it? She whispered. Or was that just a speech to scare them? Brian turned to her. He cupped her wet face with both hands. I have never been more serious in my life, he said. I love you. I tried to run away from it at the hospital because it terrified me. But watching you stand here defending me, I realized I can't run. You're my home, Julia. I broke your phone. She laughed through her tears. I'll buy a new one. I'm still a maid at heart, Brian. I don't know which fork to use. I'll eat with my hands, he promised. He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a performance for a judge. It wasn't a show for a gala. It was a promise, a seal on a new contract, one written not in ink, but in faith. 6 months later, the Goldman penthouse looked different. The sharp, dangerous sculptures were gone. Their place were framed photos of a trip to Disney World. There were colorful cushions on the leather sofas, and in the corner, a massive, messy dollhouse. Julia sat on the rug, helping Lily with a puzzle. Julia wore jeans and a sweater. She was still Mrs. Goldman, but she was also head of the new Goldman Foundation for Single Mothers. The front door opened. I'm home, Brian called out. Daddy, Lily shouted. She didn't call him Giant anymore. She didn't call him Brian. The adoption papers had been finalized last week. Brian walked in. He caught Lily as she launched herself at him, swinging her around. He looked tired. The company had taken a hit when the story leaked, but he had rebuilt it with a new image of transparency and family values. The stock was higher than ever. He put Lily down and walked over to Julia. How was the board meeting? Julia asked, kissing him. Boring. Brian smiled. I missed you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small yellow rubber duck. I saw this and thought of you, he teased. Very funny. Julia rolled her eyes. Actually, Brian sat down next to her, his face turning serious. I was thinking about that night, in the office. The night I screamed for a husband, the night I found my wife. He corrected. He took her hand, the hand that used to be rough from bleach, now soft but still strong. Thank you, he whispered, for cleaning up my life. Julia rested her head on his shoulder. Outside, the New York skyline glittered, but for the first time it didn't look cold. It looked bright. Anytime, boss, she whispered back. Anytime. What a journey. From scrubbing floors to running a foundation, Julia proved that character is worth more than any bank account. Now I have a question for you. If you found out your partner married you for a contract at first, but fell in love later, would you forgive them? Or is the lie too big? Let me know in the comments. And if you loved seeing Aunt Martha run away scared, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow we have a story about a woman who finds a secret room in her new house, and what she finds inside changes history. See you next time.